David, stand by for a moment because I want to bring some others in. Let's go now to the BBC World Service building, Bush House, and talk to Fred Halliday, Professor Fred Halliday. Fred Halliday, do you have a kind of inner sense of who had the capability to do this?
Well, there's three candidates. There's homegrown American crazies who certainly know how to fly planes and get into airports. There's Osama bin Laden, as people have said, probably with help from people in Pakistan. At what level of government, one can't tell, but there are plenty of people in Pakistan who know how to fly American planes. Thirdly, it could be Saddam, who's been recruiting Islamists to do some of his work recently, although I think it would be counterproductive for him. But we have to wait and see, and we've seen people rushing to judgment in the past over Oklahoma or TWA 800. We'll have to wait for the evidence.
This is truly the most sophisticated terrorist attack, even, well beyond the coordinated attacks on American embassies in Africa. I mean, you presumably have never seen anything like it.
I've never seen anything like it, but I think it's a bit like what some nuclear scientists said about the nuclear bomb. The biggest secret is you can do it. It may not have involved such a high level of sophistication. We don't know. But the main lesson of today is you can do it. You can hijack these planes, you can coordinate them, you can attack these buildings, and you're going to kill tens or at least many thousands of people. I think that's the biggest secret, and the solution, the secret of that is very simple. If you've got the will to do it, you're willing to die, you can do it.
I'll come back to you in a moment, Professor Halliday. Gwen Roberts, already two of our speakers have mentioned Osama bin Laden. You've met him, you've made a documentary about him. There are a lot of people do not know who he is. A very quick thumbnail sketch.
He's highly intelligent. He's very quietly spoken. He talks with a sort of biblical turn of phrase. But I have to say, when I met him, I didn't think that his organization could have had the sort level of expertise necessary to carry out this attack.
But he has networks.
He certainly has networks. These exist as cells all over the Middle East in particular. I spent a lot of time in northern Iraq. His representatives were trying to contact Islamic groups there. There was also a lot of talk, I may say, at that time, of contacts between the Iraqi government intelligence networks, the Mukhabarat, and Osama bin Laden's group. Contacts which seemed to have begun when he was in Sudan, which was quite close to Iraq. Yeah.
You don't rule it out, but you have a skepticism about his personal capacity to plot and lead such a thing.
I feel that, I mean, I spent a few hours with him, so what I say is open to question, but I felt that his group was visited by various commanders from all over the Arab world. There's a loose coordination of these cell structures, but I just wonder how whether it really is that effective in controlling a super efficient operation like today.
Let's go back to David Smith quickly, because Professor Halliday raised obviously the thing which at least has to be knocked down, which is the question of US crazies. I mean, the sort of madman that bombed the Oklahoma federal government building. Do we rule them out? I mean, what's your sense?
Oh, at this stage, John, I don't think you can rule them out, and I think what Fred Halliday is saying is perfectly valid in that respect. Equally, however, I think we have to listen very carefully. In these moments of extreme panic, John, we're watching the United States government, the superpower, frankly all over the map this afternoon. The president currently is in an underground bunker in Omaha, Nebraska, at strategic command centers out there, because clearly the military and his personal advisors don't feel they can bring him back into Washington. The only person who's at his desk this afternoon is Don Rumsfeld, the US Secretary of Defense, who refuses to leave the Pentagon even though it was bombed this morning. Clearly, John, they're pointing the finger at the Middle East, and they are looking at a nexus of groups. Should we be asking the question of could it be internal American activity? Of course we have to after Oklahoma. But let's bear this in mind. The American response will be the critical one.
Right.
And you know, earlier in the programme, I heard...
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you there, but I just want to bring in General Rose there, because, General, the whole problem with this whole incident today is that no Western intelligence had a clue this was going to happen, as far as we know. If that is the case, from a military perspective, can we be certain that we will know who did this eventually?
Obviously not. There's no such thing as total security. There's no such thing as total intelligence. I think that we do need, however, to put more resources into targeting our intelligence agencies against these sorts of terrorists, whether it be bin Laden or some other group. And at the moment, we haven't been giving them sufficient resources, either human or technical, to be able to cover these sorts of threats.
I mean, the problem is when one says that, it sounds a high aspiration, and it's one that Tony Blair enunciated only earlier this evening. But it's still hard to see how you turn your military machine, the one that you slaved away within, from one which is essentially strategic and is thinking about global nuclear threats and the rest of it, to one that infiltrates, penetrates, surveys these very extreme groups.
Well, military organisations, armies, navies and air forces can only operate effectively with good intelligence. And of course that intelligence comes from a much wider group than the military themselves. And I think that is the level at which we should be looking if we're going to improve our responses to these sorts of threats in the future.
Professor Halliday, one of the things which clearly may come forward from this is a further sense of American isolation, one of reprisal, not engagement. What's your reading of what the strategic consequences of this might be?
Well, unless it is proven that it was not somebody from the Middle East or not somebody from the Muslim world, American public opinion is going to believe that it was. And that means that there's going to be greater reluctance to get involved in any even-handed way or remotely even-handed way in the Palestinian issue. They're going to draw back from other commitments in the area, and in that sense, American isolation from within. On the other hand, other people in the world, the Europeans, we've seen the Russians, I've no reason to doubt what they say, many Arab states will try and help them as well. But it will certainly be part of any long-term response to this, not to become disengaged, but to look at the political causes of all of this, whatever they may be, and secondly, to train more people who know about this area. And if the British government's going to do something about it, they could put a bit more money into training people in the languages and in the area specialisms of this part of the world, which they have not done for a long time. So I think there are long-term educational as well as political consequences of this. But the rage in America against the Muslim world, unless it's proved to the contrary, in other words, they're guilty unless proved innocent, will certainly be a major political factor, and Bush will play on it. We'll also hear a lot of daft ideas about how somehow national missile defense is justified by this, but of course the opposite conclusion could be drawn and should be drawn.
Right. Well, as we speak, these are the live images that are going around the world as we speak. Still New York aflame, still the smoke billowing out of the Wall Street area, of the Battery Park area in which the World Trade Center sits right down on the tip of Manhattan. Manhattan itself drenched in smoke, the utter shock of it, the wounding images for President Bush himself, a tremendous, in a way, a humiliation. It's an absolutely appalling stab right into the heart of America. And David Smith in San Francisco, I mean, this is a bloody barb to thrust into the heart of the new President of the United States, who has spoken so tough on so much of this. How do you think he is going to respond?
Don't underestimate for a minute, John, the impact of this on the American psyche. And when Fred Halliday, I'd agree with him absolutely that I could see America becoming more isolationist, turning back in on itself, refusing to deal with the world. I have to say, though, that in the first few hours after what's happened here today, we all have to stand back and watch how America reacts, the way President Bush leads or does not lead. And it has to be said that if you listen to the networks out here today, the question immediately is, where is the president? Why are we not seeing the leadership? The way he responds, the way the American public responds, could well be, Fred Halliday could be right, but I would urge us all to think that it could equally go the other way, that what we've seen the Bush administration do in the past few months, which is basically back off from the major flashpoints of the world, specifically and most importantly the Middle East, that there will be many people out there now saying we have to engage, we have to have a constructive involvement with what's going on abroad, because if we don't, what we're seeing here today, this is what is going to happen to us. I
David,
personally believe it could be a wake-up call for America equally.
Are you saying that there is already criticism in the air of the way in which President Bush has handled himself today?
Oh, absolutely. If you listen to the networks and watch them all at this hour, The president is in an underground bunker in Omaha, Nebraska, and the White House is having to put out a lady who runs his communications office, who's a very skilled performer before television, but who's trying to tell the world where America is, because we cannot see the president. Obviously, what the networks are asking is, where is the president? Why have we not been able to see him take control of this situation? And frankly, the only person who's in place, I said it earlier, but think about it, the US Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, who stayed in the building this morning after it was bombed, is the only person at his desk. Everywhere else has been evacuated.
Right, David,
and the president is in an underground bunker. It's a critical question. Where does Bush go from here? How does he seize it? We're going to find out in the next few hours, John. And before we make judgments about the American psyche, let's just wait and see what he does do.
Let me just briefly then turn to General Sir Michael Rose, because, I mean, clearly it's not going to be easy, Sir Michael, for any of us to influence what George Bush does next. But if you were at the shoulder of the Prime Minister here, what advice would you be giving him about missile defence, about what line Britain should take in its very, very tender negotiations with the United States about the direction in which NATO and all the rest of it goes in the coming months?
Well, I would try and persuade the Prime Minister to tell George Bush that he cannot go down an isolationist route, that he must stay engaged, that one of the objectives of any terrorist act is to deny service, to deny the normal communications of life. And I think if they succeed in getting America to go down behind its ramparts, then they'll have gone a long way in achieving what they set out to do. I think we need to also to look at the emphasis that we put on the place in society of civil liberties and human rights, and I think that we may have to compromise on those in the future if we're going to be able to fly safely around the world and carry out our business in a normal fashion from our offices.
So
we may, in a nutshell, have to choose between human rights and safe flights.
So, Michael, thank you for the moment. Liam Halligan, just turning for a moment to the economic picture, and it's grim to be talking about business and economic and finance at a moment when people have died in huge numbers, as far as we understand. But nevertheless, today has been an utterly shocking day globally for the world economy.
Indeed, John, a human tragedy, a political tragedy, a day of seismic economic upheaval as well, which in some senses I'd imagine is what the perpetrators of this want. If you think about it, just around the corner from this World Trade Tower, New York Stock Exchange didn't even open. In London, the markets did manage to stay trading, and we saw the biggest one-day plunge since Black Monday in 1987.
I'm thinking about the micro picture of the World Trade Center itself, a building with 1,300 companies located in it, and utterly devastated. People killed, they've lost human infrastructure, they've lost physical and technological infrastructure.
John, the layers of upheaval can't be underestimated. This is the most prestigious business address in the world, the HQ of many of the world's financial thoroughbreds. And also today we've seen oil prices spike up as a result of reports that this came out of the Middle East. We've seen the dollar plunging, undermining the US and the global economic picture. All in all, I think this is going to, the short-term effects, it's going to plunge America into recession. In the long term, I think we're going to see a more isolationist US, both militarily and economically, and a more protectionist, slower-growing world.
Well, now, I mean, we were advertising that the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat and Shimon Peres, the Israeli foreign minister, were going to meet possibly this very day. In fact, Arafat has condemned the attack today, calling it unbelievable. And we're just getting this now from the Israeli foreign minister.
It has exposed one of the greatest danger to civilization and humanity. It was not an attack only upon the United States, but an attempt to create a jungle instead of the rule of law, instead of the basis of values. It can happen everywhere. Those people are merciless, they are killers, they are cheaters, they are liars, they don't have any limitation. And we feel, each of us today, like an American. The pain is...
Well, there you had the Israeli foreign minister, Shimon Peres. On the line now, live from Jericho, is Saeb Erekat, chief Palestinian negotiator. Saeb Erekat, we've heard Yasser Arafat condemn today's attack. What are your feelings about it?
It's horrifying. We're shocked. Palestinian people, in their great majority, are shocked. As a matter of fact, 10 minutes ago, President Arafat dispatched a telegraph to President Bush, offering and saying to him that I put all my humble capabilities under your service, and I extend in my name and in the name of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian leadership my deepest sympathies to the friendly American people. This is barbaric terrorism that we condemn with the strongest possible terms.
You have been deeply engaged in the peace process in the Middle East for years. Do you fear that the United States may now eschew engagement in favor of reprisal?
Well, I hope that we will not jump to any premature conclusions at this stage. And, you know, I've seen some finger pointing at the Middle East at us, and I think we should not stand guilty until proven innocent. I think many issues will be revisited, you know, whether the globalization, the foreign policy, the national security of nations. But I would like to say that there is no similarities between the situation of the Palestinian people under the Israeli occupation for the last 34 years, under desperation, under total closure and siege and killing fields by the Israelis, and the innocent American civilians who have faced this barbaric act today, which is absolutely unacceptable and which we as Palestinians utterly condemn.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, now, international air travel may never be the same again. So unbelievable has been this breach of security. Rodney Wallace, a former director of security for the International Air Transport Association, joins us live from Southampton. Rodney Wallace, I mean, what seems to have happened here seems to involve 4 massive breaches of airport security in which hijackers were able to get onto passenger-carrying jets. What's your reaction to what you've learned today?
Well, what we've seen has confirmed the situation we've known about in the United States for a long time, namely that there is 2 levels. There are 2 levels of security, one applied to international operations and one applied to domestic. The international operations, standard security, generally high, but on domestic, it's rather like catching a bus in America when you travel from one point to another. People move very quickly, and the standard of security applied to those domestic services has up until now been low. We're going to see a massive upgrading.
But given that somebody like you knew this, it's surprising that IATA didn't blow the whistle on the Americans long ago.
Well, this isn't for IATA to do that. You're talking about the United States domestic scene, and the International Air Transport Association has no control over domestic operations. So this is for the FAA to look at what's been going on in the United States and how they can bring domestic security up to the level of the international operations.
Rodney Wallace, thank you very much. Well, now, events are still developing tonight across the United States, the global consequences too. Kirsty Lang has the latest on just how unprecedented an assault on America this is and how it's unfolding. Well, now, I'm sorry we lost Kirsty Lang there, but you got still further evidence of what a shattering day this has been. Let us now go back to David Smith on the other side of America, where presumably the shock is felt as deeply as it is anywhere in America.
Oh, John, you're 3,000 miles away from what happened in New York and Washington this morning, but all across California. Remember, 2 of these planes were heading for California. One of them was coming in here to San Francisco. Within the last few minutes, just before I came up here to talk to you, I was watching television pictures downstairs of a rare international flight coming into San Francisco Airport because it couldn't go anywhere else this afternoon, and it was being escorted in by jet fighter planes of the United States Air Force. I mean, this really, the shock, the blow to the American psyche, and this is where your discussion earlier, I wanted to keep saying to you, it is that blow to the American psyche. It is this seismic effect of a day like this. And to a large extent, when you look back at Oklahoma, yes, you see one thing. The image, the metaphor being used here is Pearl Harbor. A leading US senator said here today, this is the second Pearl Harbor. Remember Franklin Roosevelt on that day, a day of infamy that will go down in history. This is another day of infamy. And the knock-on, the effect on the American psyche, be it not just the way that people in this country travel on and off planes, but more importantly, the way America engages the world, how this president, at a critical moment now in his presidency, how he defines his view of the world. It's all up for grabs, John, and it's all going to be changed by this day.
David Smith, thank you. Now, the Associated Press is reporting out of Washington that the United States now suspects Osama bin Laden in terrorist attacks, 2 US officials unnamed say. So now, tonight, America, a country deep in shock, its very symbols of power and military might, struck with a terrible and devastating force. Played out live television images around the world. America lies literally sealed off from the rest of us. All international flights cancelled, all land borders closed, telephone lines jammed, the internet under siege. The number of casualties from it all is still completely unknown. The cries for blood in New York are still being made across the television channels, and now the search for those who carried out the attacks. President Bush has put the armed forces onto high alert. Freedom itself was attacked this morning, he said, and freedom will be defended. He himself is holed up in an airbase to the south. We'll bring you any updates throughout the night, and there will be a special early morning programme tomorrow at 7 a.m. Until then, that is Channel 4 News. Good evening.
Due to tonight's scheduled changes, we are unable to bring you Murder Rooms, but it will return to BBC One next Tuesday at 8:30.
70% of our planet is covered by water. Yet
thousands feared dead as 2 planes hit the World Trade Center.
New York's famous Twin Towers collapse.
Tens of thousands run for their lives.
The Pentagon in flames as a 3rd plane targets Washington.
Devastated New York. The president says he'll hunt down those responsible.
Sky News.